My son needed surgery to survive. My parents said, "It's not our problem," then posted beach pics. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Martinez's office buzzed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across his weathered face as he delivered the words that would split my world in half. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm afraid Malik's condition is more serious than we initially thought." I gripped the plastic chair arms so tight my knuckles went white. Malik sat beside me, swinging his legs like any normal 8-year-old would, completely oblivious to the storm brewing around him. His Batman t-shirt was wrinkled from our rushed trip to the hospital, and there was still chocolate milk on his chin from breakfast. He looked so small, so innocent, so perfectly fine that I almost convinced myself the doctor was talking about someone else's child. "The cardiac defect we discovered during his routine checkup. It's progressing faster than we anticipated," Dr. Martinez continued, his voice gentle but firm. "Without surgical intervention within the next 2 weeks, Malik's heart could fail completely." The room started spinning. Those medical terms, cardiac defect, surgical intervention, heart failure, they bounced around my skull like pinballs, refusing to make sense. This was my baby. My miracle child who had come into this world fighting, who had survived every cold, every scraped knee, every childhood bump with the resilience of a tiny warrior. How could his own heart be betraying him? "What kind of surgery?" I managed to whisper, though my throat felt like I'd swallowed sandpaper. Dr. Martinez pulled out a folder thick with papers and charts. "It's called a ventricular septal defect repair. We'll need to close the hole in the wall between his heart's chambers. It's a complex procedure, but Dr. Chun is one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the state. Malik will be in excellent hands." I nodded mechanically, trying to process everything while Malik hummed the theme song from his favorite cartoon show. "And the success rate?" "With early intervention, it's very high, around 95%. But, Mrs. Johnson, I need to be transparent with you about the financial aspect." He slid a piece of paper across his desk. "The total cost for the surgery, hospital stay, and recovery care will be approximately $127,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I stared at those digits, 1, 2, 7 followed by 3 zeros, and felt my stomach drop through the floor. My teacher's salary barely covered our monthly expenses as it was. After rent, groceries, Malik's school supplies, and keeping our 10-year-old Honda running, I was lucky if I had $50 left at the end of each month. "Insurance?" I asked weakly, though I already knew the answer would disappoint me. "Your plan covers about 60% of the procedure itself, but there are significant gaps in coverage for the preoperative tests, the specialized equipment, and the extended recovery period. You're looking at roughly $78,000 out of pocket." $78,000. I could teach for 3 years and not save that much money. The weight of impossibility pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. How do you tell your child that money, something so abstract, so meaningless to his 8-year-old mind, might be the thing that stands between him and survival? That night, after Malik fell asleep clutching his stuffed elephant, I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by bills, bank statements, and rejection letters from 3 different loan companies. I'd called every financial aid program the hospital recommended. I'd applied for medical credit cards that came with interest rates that would have made loan sharks blush. Nothing. Every door slammed shut in my face with the same cold efficiency. By 2 a.m., I'd exhausted every option I could think of except one. The one I'd been avoiding since Dr. Martinez had first mentioned the cost. My parents. I hadn't spoken to them in 6 months, not since the disaster of Malik's last birthday party when my father had made one too many comments about my life choices, and my mother had spent the entire afternoon comparing Malik unfavorably to my cousin's children. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about survival. My hands shook as I dialed their number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before my mother's voice answered, groggy and annoyed. "Denise? Do you know what time it is?" "Mom, I'm sorry to call so late, but this better be an emergency." "It is." My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay composed. "It's Malik. He needs surgery and I need help." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, my father's voice came through the speaker. They must have been in bed together, and she'd put me on speakerphone. What kind of surgery? His tone was already defensive, like I was about to ask him to donate a kidney. I explained everything, the heart defect, the timeline, the cost. With each detail, the silence on the other end grew heavier, more suffocating. When I finished, I waited for the questions any grandparent would ask. How is he feeling? What can we do? When is the surgery scheduled? Instead, my father cleared his throat with the same dismissive sound he'd made when I told him I was pregnant at 19, when I'd chosen to keep the baby despite not having a husband, when I decided to become a teacher instead of pursuing the business degree he'd wanted me to get. Denise, your mother and I, we've worked hard for what we have. We can't be expected to bail you out every time you get in over your head. Dad, this isn't about bailing me out. This is about your grandson's life. We didn't make the decision to have a child you couldn't afford to care for properly. The words hit like a slap across the face. In the background, I could hear my mother whispering agreement, adding her own poison to the conversation. We can't afford that kind of expense, Denise. We're not made of money. Made of money. I thought about their house, the 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs with the manicured lawn and the 3-car garage. I thought about my father's new Lexus, my mother's designer handbags, their annual cruise to the Caribbean. Not made of money, but comfortable enough to spend more on a vacation than I made in 6 months. But he's your grandson, I whispered, hating how desperate I sounded, hating that I was begging, hating that my child's life hung in the balance of this conversation. It's not our problem, Denise. My father's voice was final, cold as winter steel. You made your choices. Now you need to live with the consequences. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the dim light of the kitchen. The silence in our apartment felt crushing, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on the street below. I'd been dropped twice in the span of 60 seconds, once as a daughter who'd believed her parents might show mercy in a crisis, and again as a mother who'd failed to secure her child's future. I walked to Malik's room and stood in the doorway, watching his chest rise and fall with each breath. His face was peaceful in sleep, innocent, and trusting that the adults in his life would figure out how to keep him safe. The Batman nightlight cast a soft glow across his features, and for a moment, I could pretend that everything was normal, that we were just an ordinary mother and son dealing with ordinary problems. But the surgery date circled in red on our calendar told a different story. 14 days to find $78,000. 14 days to perform a miracle. 14 days to prove that love could somehow triumph over mathematics. I sank down onto the floor beside his bed, my back against the wall, and began to plan. There had to be another way. There had to be something I hadn't thought of, some stone I hadn't turned over. Because giving up wasn't an option. Not when Malik was counting on me. Not when every breath he took was a reminder of how precious and fragile life could be. The call I never thought I'd make was over, but the fight for my son's life was just beginning. 2 nights later, I found myself back in the sterile corridors of Children's Hospital, the smell of antiseptic and floor wax burning my nostrils. Malik had taken a turn for the worse that afternoon. His lips had turned blue during recess, and his teacher had called an ambulance before I could even get to the school. Now he lay in the pediatric ward, connected to monitors that beeped steadily, tracking every heartbeat like a metronome counting down to an inevitable deadline. The doctors had moved up his surgery date. We now had 8 days instead of 14. I sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside his bed, watching the rise and fall of his small chest under the hospital gown that was 3 sizes too big for him. The 4-line in his arm looked enormous against his thin wrist, and every few minutes, he'd shift in his sleep and wince. My brave little boy was trying so hard not to show how scared he was, but I could see it in the way he clutched his stuffed elephant tighter than usual, in the way his eyes searched my face for reassurance I wasn't sure I could give. Mom? His voice was barely a whisper in the dim room. I'm here, baby. Am I going to die? The question hit me like a freight train. I reached over and smoothed his hair back from his forehead, fighting to keep my voice steady.
No, sweetheart.
You're going to be fine. The doctors are going to fix your heart, and then you'll be stronger than ever. Like a superhero? Exactly like a superhero. I kissed his forehead, tasting the salt of my own tears. Now try to get some sleep, okay? I'll be right here. He nodded and closed his eyes, but I could tell he was still awake, still listening to the strange sounds of the hospital at night. After what felt like hours, his breathing finally deepened into genuine sleep. I pulled out my phone, desperate for any distraction from the crushing weight of helplessness that threatened to suffocate me. Maybe I'd missed an email from one of the financial aid programs. Maybe there was a medical fundraising site I hadn't tried yet. Maybe someone, somewhere, had an answer I hadn't thought of. Instead, I found myself scrolling through Facebook, mindlessly watching other people's lives unfold in carefully curated squares of happiness. Birthday parties, vacation photos, announcements about promotions and new cars, a parade of normalcy that felt like it belonged to a different universe than the one I was trapped in. Then I saw it. The photo made my phone screen blur for a moment as my eyes filled with tears of pure, blinding rage. There they were, my parents, looking tan and relaxed, standing on what appeared to be pristine white sand. My mother wore a flowing sundress and an enormous sun hat, holding a champagne flute that caught the golden light of what was clearly a tropical sunset. My father stood beside her in a Hawaiian shirt I'd never seen before, his arm around her waist, both of them grinning like they didn't have a care in the world. The caption read, "Living our best life in Tahiti. Palm tree clinking glasses. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself. Hashtag blessed, hashtag paradise found, hashtag living the dream." Tahiti. They were in Tahiti while their grandson lay in a hospital bed, his life hanging in the balance because they'd claimed they couldn't afford to help save him. The champagne in my mother's hand probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The resort they were staying at, I could see the luxury cabanas in the background, likely cost more per night than my monthly rent. I scrolled through the comments, my stomach churning as I read the responses from their friends and neighbors. So jealous. You too deserve this. Living the dream. Each comment felt like a knife twisting deeper into an already gaping wound. But it was my Aunt Linda's comment that made my blood run cold. Wow, this must have cost a fortune. How long have you been planning this trip? My mother had replied, "Oh, we booked it last minute." Sometimes you just have to be spontaneous. Two hearts. Last minute. They had booked a trip to Tahiti, a trip that probably cost $15,000 or more. At the same time, they were telling me they couldn't help save their grandson's life. While I was sitting beside Malik's hospital bed, calculating whether I could afford to eat dinner or if I should save those $5 for parking, they were sipping champagne on a beach that was quite literally on the other side of the world. I took a screenshot of the photo, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I needed proof that this wasn't all some terrible nightmare. Maybe I needed evidence of their cruelty for later, when the shock wore off and I started to doubt my own memory of their coldness. The worst part wasn't even the hypocrisy, though that cut deep enough. It was the casualness of it all. The way they were posting about treating yourself and being blessed while their daughter sat in a hospital, begging the universe for a miracle they could have provided with a simple phone call to their bank. Malik stirred in his sleep, and I quickly closed the app, shoving my phone into my purse like it was radioactive. But the damage was already done. The image was burned into my brain, their smiling faces against that perfect sunset, the champagne, the casual cruelty of their timing. I looked at my son, so small and fragile in that hospital bed, and felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore or even anger. It was something colder, harder. It was the death of illusions I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For 28 years, I'd made excuses for my parents. They were from a different generation. They believed in tough love. They wanted me to be independent and self-sufficient. But looking at that photo, I finally saw the truth I'd been avoiding. They simply didn't love Malik and me enough to choose us over their own comfort. The monitors continued their steady beeping, counting down the hours until a surgery I still couldn't afford, while somewhere in the South Pacific, my parents slept in luxury, their phones silenced against any emergency calls from their daughter. 8 days left to find a miracle. 7 days, really, since tomorrow is already here. The next morning brought a fresh wave of rejections. 3 more medical loan companies, 2 credit unions, and a crowdfunding platform that informed me my campaign didn't meet their community guidelines, whatever that meant. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by a graveyard of crumpled applications and denial letters, feeling like I was drowning in bureaucratic quicksand. Malik was stable enough to come home for a few hours between hospital visits, and I'd promised him we'd work on a science project about the solar system. But as I watched him carefully arranging construction paper planets on our coffee table, moving slowly to avoid overtaxing his heart, all I could think about was that we were running out of time. Mom, did you know that Jupiter has 79 moons? Malik looked up at me with those bright eyes that still held all the wonder of childhood, despite everything he'd been through. I didn't know that, sweetheart. That's amazing. I tried to match his enthusiasm, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. He must have sensed something was wrong because he set down his glue stick and crawled over to where I sat on the floor. Are you sad about the money? The directness of 8-year-olds never ceased to amaze me. There was no point in lying to him. He was too smart, and he'd already overheard enough phone conversations to understand that money was the barrier standing between him and getting better. A little bit, baby, but I'm going to figure it out, okay? I promise. He hugged me then, his thin arms wrapping around my neck with surprising strength. Maybe we could have a bake sale? Mrs. Henderson raised money for new playground equipment that way. My heart nearly broke at his innocent optimism. A bake sale. If only $78,000 worth of problems could be solved with brownies and lemonade. That's a great idea, I whispered into his hair. We'll definitely think about that. After he fell asleep that afternoon, the medication made him tired. I found myself standing in front of my bedroom closet, staring at the stack of boxes I'd shoved to the back corner after we'd moved into this apartment 3 years ago. Most of it was junk I'd kept meaning to sort through. Old photo albums, Malik's baby clothes I couldn't bring myself to donate, random paperwork from jobs I'd had before teaching. But there might be something useful buried in there. Old insurance policies, maybe, or financial documents I'd forgotten about. At this point, I was willing to dig through every scrap of paper if it meant finding even a sliver of hope. The first box yielded nothing but dust and nostalgia, report cards from elementary school, a dried corsage from prom, letters from college friends who'd long since drifted out of my life. The second box was more practical but equally useless. Tax returns from years past, lease agreements, car insurance paperwork. It was in the third box, wedged between my high school diploma and a stack of birthday cards, that I found the envelope. It was cream-colored and expensive-looking, the kind of stationery my grandmother had always favored. My name was written across the front in her careful, precise handwriting, the same elegant script she'd used to address Christmas cards and write grocery lists. Seeing it made my chest tight with grief all over again, even though she'd been gone for 2 years. Inside was a folded document, official-looking and dense with legal language. At the top, in bold letters, were the words "Last Will and Testament of Evelyn Marie Washington." My hands started shaking before I'd even finished reading the first paragraph. This wasn't the will that had been read at the lawyer's office after her funeral, the one that had left her house to my parents and a few small bequests to various family members. This was different. This was dated 6 months later. I had to read the relevant section 3 times before it fully sank in. To my beloved granddaughter, Denise Marie Johnson, I leave the entirety of my investment portfolio and savings accounts, totaling approximately $150,000, to be held in trust until such time as she may have need of it. However, this bequest comes with one non-negotiable condition. Denise must legally sever all financial and guardianship ties with her parents, Robert and Margaret Washington, before she can access these funds. This provision is made not out of malice, but out of love, as I have witnessed firsthand how they have manipulated and controlled her throughout her life. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the freedom to walk away. The document fell from my nerveless fingers and fluttered to the floor like a wounded bird. $150,000. More than enough for Malik's surgery, his recovery, and our future security. My grandmother had left me a lifeline, reaching from beyond the grave to save us both. But the condition? I picked up the will again, searching for some loophole, some different interpretation of those carefully chosen words. But there was no ambiguity. To save my son, I would have to legally cut my parents out of my life completely. Not just emotionally or symbolically, but with the cold finality of legal documents and court orders. The irony wasn't lost on me. After what they'd done, after their refusal to help, after those champagne-soaked photos from Tahiti, the idea of severing ties with them didn't feel like a sacrifice anymore. It felt like liberation.
But this wasn't just about me.
It was about Malik losing his grandparents forever, even if they'd already proven how little he meant to them. It was about burning bridges that could never be rebuilt, about making a choice that would echo through generations. I thought about my grandmother, sharp and observant until the very end. She'd watched my parents control and manipulate me for years, seen how they used money as a weapon and love as a bargaining chip. She'd known exactly what kind of people they were, and she'd given me a way out. All I had to do was be brave enough to take it. At the bottom of the envelope, I found a business card for a lawyer, David Chun, estate planning attorney. There was a handwritten note on the back in my grandmother's familiar script. He has the original documents. He's been waiting for your call. Malik coughed from the bedroom, a wet sound that made my blood run cold. We were down to 6 days now. 6 days to decide between the family that had already abandoned us and the future that my grandmother had tried to secure for us. I reached for my phone, David Chen's business card trembling in my other hand. The choice was becoming clearer by the second. I sat on my apartment floor for the next 3 hours, the will spread out in front of me like a roadmap to salvation that demanded I drive through hell to reach it. The legal language blurred together as I read it over and over, searching for some hidden meaning, some escape clause that would let me have both the money and my family, what was left of it, anyway. But my grandmother had been thorough. The condition was ironclad, complete legal severance. No contact, no shared holidays, no phone calls on birthdays. It meant Malik would grow up never knowing his grandparents, and I would become an orphan by choice at 28 years old. The weight of that decision pressed down on me like a physical thing. As a Black woman, family had always been my anchor, my safe harbor in a world that often felt hostile and unwelcoming. My grandmother had raised me with stories of ancestors who had survived slavery, Jim Crow, and generations of hardship by clinging to each other, by never letting the outside world tear apart what they'd built together. Family is everything, she used to say, because when the world turns its back on you, blood will always be there. But what happened when blood turned its back on you first? I pulled out my phone and scrolled back to that photo from Tahiti, studying my parents' faces with new eyes. My father's smile was the same one he'd worn when he told his friends about his successful business, his investment portfolio, his well-deserved retirement. My mother's laugh was probably the same one she'd used when explaining to her book club why she couldn't help with the charity fundraiser this year. Too expensive, times were tough, you understand. They looked so happy, so carefree. Like they'd never received a desperate phone call from their daughter begging them to help save their grandson's life. A memory surfaced unbidden. I was 7 years old, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table while she braided my hair for church. My parents had just dropped me off for the weekend, and I'd been crying because some kids at school had made fun of my secondhand dress. "Baby girl," my grandmother had said, her fingers gentle but firm as she worked, "let me tell you something important. Blood don't make family, love does. And sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest." At the time, I thought she was just trying to make me feel better about the mean kids at school. Now I wondered if she'd been trying to prepare me for this moment. I thought about all the small moments from my childhood that had felt normal then, but stung with new meaning now. The way my mother had forgotten to pick me up from piano lessons when her soap opera was on. The way my father had missed my high school graduation because he had a golf tournament. The way they'd both been conspicuously absent when I'd graduated from college, the first person in our family to earn a degree. And then there was Malik. When I'd first told them I was pregnant, unwed and barely 19, My father had actually suggested I take care of the problem before it became an embarrassment to the family. My mother had spent the entire pregnancy reminding me how much babies cost, how hard it would be to raise a child alone, how I was ruining my future. But when Malik was born, beautiful, perfect, with eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom in the world, something had shifted in me. I'd looked at this tiny person who depended on me for everything, and I'd realized that I would do anything, sacrifice anything, to protect him. Even my relationship with parents who had never really supported me anyway. The irony was bitter as burnt coffee. They were worried about me ruining my future, but Malik had become my future. He'd given me purpose, drive, and a love so fierce it sometimes scared me with its intensity. And now, to save the life they'd helped me create, I had to choose between him and them. It wasn't really a choice at all. But knowing what I had to do and being at peace with it were two different things. I kept remembering the good moments, few as they were. My mother teaching me to braid hair when I was 12, her fingers patient and careful as she showed me how to weave the strands together. My father's rare moments of pride, when I'd made honor roll, when I'd landed my first teaching job, when I'd bought this little apartment with my own money. Those memories felt like photographs now, faded and fragile, beautiful but ultimately powerless against the stark reality of hospital bills and champagne toasts in paradise. Malik appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. The afternoon nap had left his hair sticking up in all directions, and there were sheet marks on his cheek. He looked so young, so vulnerable in his Batman pajamas.
Mom?
Why are you sitting on the floor? I quickly gathered up the old papers and smiled at him, though it felt like my face might crack from the effort. Just looking through some old stuff, baby. How are you feeling? Tired. And my chest feels funny. He walked over and settled down beside me, leaning his head against my shoulder. Are you still sad about the money? The simple question broke something inside me. Here was my son, facing surgery that could save or end his life, and he was worried about my feelings. He was 8 years old and braver than I'd ever been. Not anymore, I said and meant it. I think I figured out how to fix everything. Really? Really? I kissed the top of his head, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and the ineffable sweetness that was purely him. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, but I want you to know that I will always choose you, no matter what. He looked up at me with those wise eyes. Even if it makes other people mad? Even then. He nodded solemnly, like he understood more than a child should have to. Then he curled up against me, trusting and warm, while I held David Chen's business card and planned how to save his life by setting us both free. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jolting me from the light sleep I'd been managing between checking on Malik every few hours. Dr. Martinez's voice was calm but urgent, the tone medical professionals perfected when delivering news that would shatter someone's world, but needed to sound routine. Mrs. Johnson, I need you to bring Malik to the hospital immediately. His latest blood work shows signs of heart failure progressing faster than we anticipated. We need to move the surgery up to tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. Not next week. Not in 3 days when I might have figured out another solution. Tomorrow. I threw on clothes with shaking hands while Malik groggily protested being woken up in the middle of the night. His lips had a bluish tint that made my stomach clench with terror, and by the time we reached the emergency room, he was struggling to breathe properly. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of medical terminology, consent forms, and the steady beeping of monitors that now tracked every struggling beat of my son's heart. Pre-op tests, anesthesia consultations, surgical schedules, all of it happening around us while the financial coordinator kept asking the same question: how will you be handling payment for the procedure? By dawn, Malik was prepped for surgery, looking impossibly small in his hospital gown within 4 lines snaking from his arm. The anesthesiologist was ready. Dr. Chen was scrubbed in. The operating room was prepared. And I still didn't have the money. Mom, I'm scared, Malik whispered, his voice barely audible over the bustle of medical staff preparing for his procedure. I took his hand, careful not to disturb the 4, and looked into those trusting eyes that had been my North Star for 8 years. "Remember what we talked about? You're going to be like a superhero after this. You're going to have the strongest heart of anyone in your class. Will you be here when I wake up?" "I'll be right here. I promise." Dr. Chin appeared beside us, kind but professional. "Mrs. Johnson, I need to be direct with you. The surgery needs to happen now, but our billing department is requiring payment authorization before we can proceed." The world tilted sideways. They were going to let my son die because of paperwork, because of numbers on a computer screen, because I couldn't prove I was worthy of their help. That's when I pulled out David Chen's business card. No relation to the surgeon, just one of those cosmic coincidences that felt like fate. My fingers were trembling so badly, I could barely dial the number. "Mr. Chen, this is Denise Johnson. I think my grandmother left some documents with you. Evelyn Washington." His voice was gentle, immediately understanding. "Ms. Johnson, I've been waiting for your call. Your grandmother was very specific about the circumstances under which you might need to access the trust. My son is going into surgery right now. They won't proceed without payment, and I understand completely. I can have the paperwork ready for you to sign within the hour, and the funds can be transferred immediately. Your grandmother was very thorough in her planning. An hour felt like a lifetime when every minute might be the difference between life and death, but Dr. Chin agreed to prep Malik for surgery while we handled the financial arrangements. The OR team kept him stable, monitors tracking his vitals while lawyers and bank representatives moved money around like pieces on a chessboard. David Chin met me in the hospital cafeteria at 8:30 a.m., carrying a briefcase that contained my family's future. He was older than I'd expected, with silver hair and the kind of gentle manner that suggested he'd helped many families navigate their worst moments. "Your grandmother was remarkable," he said as he spread the documents across the small table. "She came to me 18 months before she passed, very specific about what she wanted to accomplish. She said her son had always been selfish, but she hoped her granddaughter had inherited better instincts." The legal documents were extensive, pages of text that would sever every legal tie between my parents and me. No inheritance rights, no medical decision-making authority, no legal standing as family members. In the eyes of the law, we would become strangers. "She knew this day would come," David continued. "Maybe not the exact circumstances, but she knew you'd eventually need to choose between their approval and your own survival. She wanted to make sure you had the means to choose yourself." My hands shook as I signed page after page, each signature another step away from the family I'd been born into and toward the family I'd chosen to protect. Robert and Margaret Washington would no longer be legally recognized as my parents or Malik's grandparents. We were cutting ourselves free from their tree to plant our own roots. "The trust contains $187,000, David explained as I signed the final document. "Your grandmother's investments performed better than expected. This should cover all of Malik's medical expenses and provide you with a foundation for your future. $187,000. More than enough to save my son and start over somewhere new, somewhere my parents' shadow couldn't reach us." The bank transfer took exactly 43 minutes. By 9:43 a.m., the hospital's billing department had received full payment for Malik's surgery. By 10:15, he was being wheeled into the operating room, sleepy from pre-medication but giving me a brave thumbs up as the doors closed behind him. I sat in the surgical waiting room, legally orphaned but spiritually liberated, watching the clock tick away the hours of my son's procedure. Other families filled the chairs around me, mothers clutching coffee cups, fathers pacing the hallways, grandparents offering quiet comfort. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about disappointing anyone. I wasn't calculating the emotional cost of asking for help. I wasn't bracing myself for criticism disguised as concern. I was free. And in 6 hours, when Dr. Chin emerged with a smile to tell me the surgery had been a complete success, I would be free and victorious. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the freedom to walk away." She'd given me more than money. She'd given me permission to choose love over obligation, future over past, and my son's life over their approval. The papers in my purse made it official. I was no longer their daughter. I was finally my own woman. 3 months later, Malik was running circles around the playground at Jefferson Elementary, his laughter carrying across the autumn air like music. The scar on his chest had healed to a thin pink line that he proudly showed his friends, calling it his superhero mark. His cardiologist had declared the surgery a complete success. His heart was now stronger than most kids his age, and there was no reason he couldn't live a completely normal life. I sat on a park bench, grading papers for my new position at a private school that paid nearly double what I'd made before. The trust fund had given me the freedom to be selective about opportunities, to choose based on what would make me happy rather than what would simply pay the bills. For the first time in years, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, wasn't calculating whether I could afford both groceries and gas in the same week. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We're back from Greece. Dinner Sunday at 6? Can't wait to hear how Malik is doing." 2 hearts.
Greece.
After Tahiti, they'd apparently decided to make international travel a regular habit. I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the woman who used to answer these texts immediately, who would have rearranged her entire schedule to accommodate their invitation, who would have spent hours preparing Malik to be on his best behavior for grandparents who barely acknowledged his existence. That woman felt like a stranger now. I typed back, "We'll be there." Sunday arrived with a kind of crisp October weather that made everything feel possible. Malik wore his favorite button-down shirt, the blue one that brought out his eyes, and I put on a dress I'd bought with money I didn't have to budget for, a simple black piece that made me feel confident and beautiful. My parents' house looked exactly the same as always, perfectly manicured lawn, luxury cars in the driveway, the kind of suburban prosperity that they'd worked hard to achieve and never let anyone forget about. But walking up to the front door, I felt different. Not smaller or more nervous like I usually did, just different. My mother answered the door with her usual theatrical embrace, though I noticed she was careful not to mess up her makeup. "Denise, you look wonderful." And Malik, my goodness, you've grown so much. My father appeared behind her, tanned from their latest vacation, wearing the kind of casual clothes that cost more than most people's rent. "Good to see you both.
Come in, come in."
Your mother's made that roast you used to love." We settled into their formal dining room, the one with the crystal chandelier and the china that only came out for special occasions, or apparently, for their daughter, who they hadn't seen since their grandson nearly died. Malik chatted excitedly about school, his friends, his upcoming birthday party, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents swirling around the table. "So," my mother said as she served dessert, "how did everything work out with Malik's surgery? We've been so worried, but you know how it is when you're traveling. It's hard to keep in touch." Hard to keep in touch. As if concern for their grandson's life was a matter of international roaming charges. "The surgery went perfectly," I said, my voice steady and calm. "He's completely healthy now. Strong as an ox, actually." "That's wonderful." My father boomed with the kind of enthusiasm that felt performative. "I knew you'd figure something out. You've always been resourceful." Resourceful. That was one way to put it. My mother leaned forward conspiratorially. "You must tell us how you managed the financial side of things. We felt terrible that we couldn't help, but you know how tight things have been for us." Tight things. I thought about the photos I'd seen from Greece just last week, another 5-star resort, another round of expensive dinners and luxury excursions. "Actually," I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate precision, "I need to tell you both something important." The room went quiet except for the ticking of their antique clock and the soft sound of Malik coloring in his activity book. "I don't need you anymore." Grandma made sure of that. Their smiles faltered like actors who'd forgotten their lines. My mother's fork hung suspended halfway to her mouth, and my father's confident posture deflated slightly. "What do you mean?" my mother asked carefully. I pulled out a copy of the legal documents from my purse and placed them on the table between us. "Grandma left me a trust fund. A substantial one. But there was a condition. I could only access it if I legally severed all ties with you." The silence stretched like a taut wire, and I could see the exact moment understanding dawned on their faces. You didn't, my father whispered. I did. I reached over and took Malik's hand. When you told me it wasn't your problem, when you posted those photos from Tahiti while your grandson was in the hospital, when you made it clear that champagne and sunsets were more important than family, I realized Grandma was right. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to walk away. My mother's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Denise, you can't be serious. We're family. No, I said, standing up and helping Malik gather his things. We're not. Not anymore. Legally, officially, and practically, we're strangers now. And honestly, it's the most liberating thing I've ever done. Malik looked up at me with those wise eyes. Are we leaving, Mom? We are, sweetheart. As we walked toward the door, my father's voice followed us, desperate now and stripped of its usual authority. You can't do this, Denise. You can't just walk away from family. I turned back one last time, looking at these people who had given me life but never really supported it, who had taught me that love was conditional and help came with strings attached. Watch me, I said. And then Malik took my hand, and we walked out into the crisp autumn afternoon, leaving the door open behind us because I was done closing things gently for their comfort. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly free. The sun was shining, my son was healthy and happy, and we had a whole future ahead of us, one where we got to choose who deserved a place in our story. We were finally home,